Greetings everybody, I'm obviously Jesus and welcome to the third Patreon video for the month of March 2018. I got my computer here so I'm not looking at a tiny little phone screen and struggling to read the entire time. I got my notes blown up over here, so you're going to maybe hear some tapping as I move through the file here. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get right to the topic of today's video, which is, if you've read the title, I'm sure you already know, it is on the topic of social courage and Billy Bush. For those of you who don't know, and for those of you who are probably outside of America and maybe didn't pay super close attention to the 2016 election, garbage fire as it was, Billy Bush was this host, this television host. He's had several different jobs throughout his life, and he recently got fired from one back in 2016 after a tape of him and Donald Trump on an Access Hollywood bus when he was working for them in 2005 surfaced, where Donald Trump was making some lewd and sexist comments to Billy Bush, and Billy Bush seemed like he was playing along. But why I bring this up now, after the election and after, 13 years later almost, is because Billy Bush is basically, he took a while to recompose himself. I think his marriage fell apart last year, so he's not having a good year. Doesn't really matter though, because, to most people, he's the cousin of the 43rd president of the United States, George W. Bush, and the nephew of his father, the president, George H.W. Bush. So he's not really part of a great family, a family that really is only looking slightly better in hindsight because of how horrible Donald Trump is as a president. And anyway, the reason I bring it up now is because Billy Bush was a couple months ago on the Colbert Report, which I watch a lot, not the Colbert Report, rather the Colbert Late Show. And he was also on Bill Maher's show, Real Time with Bill Maher, last night, and we can talk about Bill Maher in another video. He's kind of I don't know that Bill Maher really is an important figure here, but I did wind up, just for lack of anything else to watching the YouTube clips of this interview, and he was on there basically attempting to rehabilitate his image and career. And I feel like this is another video I'm going to be making that's on a political subject, because I feel like, again, as I've talked about in other videos, it's quite easy to be taken in by the logical errors of the left, because, like I said, a lot of people that I know and that I follow on social media, they seem to be very secure in making the same logical errors as people on the left, whereas it's obvious, when the Republicans do some bad shit, because they really don't get anything right, and they're kind of the buffoons of this country right now. So I do think it's important to, obviously it's fine and good to, hate on the right, but I think a lot of people are less alert to the flaws of the left and just how weird people can get in pursuit of a super progressive agenda sometimes, and how unreasonable their expectations can sometimes be. So I feel like it's important not to just do the easy thing and pick the low-hanging fruit and make a bunch of videos about how, the Republicans suck and Donald Trump is a shitty president, because nobody's really going to want to watch me talk about something that's very, very obvious to basically all human beings, even those who once supported him. So I don't really want to belabor the point and just go on about how, go on in these videos about how bad the right is. I feel like it's more important to do the hard thing and do the more challenging thing, which is to point out the errors in the political party that is currently seen as, being on the side of the angels, being the right side of history. I feel like it's more important to point out their flaws so that they can hopefully be identified and fixed, rather than just, harping and beating a dead horse on the people we obviously know are pretty shitty. So this video is, for those of you who don't know, I'm probably going to link in the description the original Access Hollywood tape. It's on YouTube. It's like 5 minutes, so if you want to take your time and watch that, actually, you don't have to watch even the back half of it. Everything that was really controversial happened in the first couple of minutes, the first 2.5 minutes. So you can really get a good sense of what's going on here, just by spending 2 minutes of your time. And I'm probably going to reference a lot of things that are in that video that I'm not going to explicitly state here. So I would definitely recommend that you go and watch the video so you understand basically the entire context of what I'm talking about right now. It's really not going to cost you that much of your life. But the first thing I want to point out is that even though throughout this video I'm going to be basically taking the side of Billy Bush in a lot of things, he is not innocent here. I'm not saying that really going to make a determination on whether or not he should have been fired from his job in 2016 for what he did in 2005 on this bus, or what he sort of allowed to happen, I guess, is the contention for most people, because he's really not innocent here. The most reprehensible thing that he did was very clearly not anything that was said on the bus, not any lack of objection from him, but when he gets off this bus, he and Donald Trump are going to meet with this soap opera actress, Ariane Zucker, and when they get off the bus, after Donald Trump has been talking about how he just starts kissing beautiful women without consent, basically, and he asks for a Tic Tac, Billy Bush then proceeds to, once they're off the bus, sort of serve. I think I read an article about this on the AV Club, and the terminology they used was serve her up to him. Like, he encouraged her to hug Donald Trump and then himself. And he called himself the Bushy, which is kind of stupid. But that's pretty much the most reprehensible thing Billy Bush does throughout this entire Access Hollywood video. He gets off the bus after Trump has been talking like this and says, yeah, hey, here, I'm going to goad you into physical contact with this person who has just said some very terrible things. So Billy Bush, definitely not innocent here, but that's not what this video is going to be about. I want to make it clear that what I'm going to talk about in this video is what people seem to focus on, and maybe I have just heard the wrong articles about this. Maybe I haven't seen all the discussions, or maybe it was different when it first happened back in 2016 and I wasn't paying that close attention. But nowadays, when it comes up nowadays, it's not about Billy Bush asking her to hug this guy mostly. And that's why I brought up the Real Time with Bill Maher show, because it's not about Bill Maher, it's about one of his guests who was on there with Billy Bush, Naira Haq, I believe, who worked for the Obama administration as an advisor. And when I hear people talk about this, including Ms. Haq here, they don't talk about the hug or anything. They talk about Billy Bush basically being a coward for not confronting Donald Trump. That is what has become, in hindsight here, the big issue. Not the hug, not anything else. The real big issue that people seem to like to take Billy Bush to task for now is not confronting Donald Trump in a private conversation. For context, this was a hot mic situation. If that terminology doesn't exist in other countries and languages, hot mic is basically where, like, if I walked off out of the frame of this video and I was talking about like how I hate Jews or something, that's a hot mic situation, and then that accidentally makes it into the video, or that gets recorded to some area of tape that wasn't supposed to be because my mic wasn't supposed to be on. That's a hot mic situation. And speaking of the Colbert Late Show, if you watch Colbert's monologues, their pianist, their band leader, John Baptiste, his mic is hot all the time. Hot mic just means your mic is on and you can hear. It's hysterical. Go watch the Colbert Late Show monologues, and their pianist, who is off screen, you can't even see him. He's just making random asides and comments throughout the entire monologue. It's hysterical that it's been going on for years and nobody really seems to mind. It's not like he's funny in and of himself really most of the time. It's just funny that he's on there. But anyway, that's just my little hot mic explanation anecdote story. But yeah, this is a hot mic situation. And even though basically Billy Bush and Donald Trump thought they were having a private conversation, not on tape, not on video anywhere, basically the big thing is that people are saying that Billy Bush should have taken Donald Trump to task and said, even in this private conversation where no one was watching, he should have stood up, metaphorically, if not physically, and said that, Donald, this is wrong. And that's what this video is going to be about. The expectation that Billy Bush and people like Billy Bush in situations like that are supposed to take people to task. I believe Naira Haq on the Bill Maher show said that when you're in a room with a powerful person or powerful people who look like you racially, you're supposed to, and they say something bigoted or prejudiced or sexist or misogynist or whatever, you're supposed to, have the quote unquote social courage, which is where the title of this video comes from, to stand up and challenge them, and in any kind of conversation, whether it be public or private. So this video is not going to be about Billy Bush's interactions again with the person that he encouraged to hug Donald Trump, or whether or not he should have been fired, because the truth is I don't really know, because there's two sides to this coin most certainly. This video is going to be about Ms. Haq's concept. It's not her concept, of course. It's just something that she was championing, and I'm not sure if this phrase has been coined elsewhere, but this is the first time I've heard social courage. So it's going to be about that idea, the idea that people need to rise to the occasion and speak out, even in private conversations, against this kind of sexist or otherwise discriminatory language. Now, I really do think it's worth remembering that this is 11 years ago. This is in 2005, or 11 years before the presidential election when it was revealed. It's almost 13 years ago now. And, at that point, Trump was not the president of the United States. He was not a presidential candidate or hopeful. He was merely some big, blustering TV personality on his way to guest star in a soap opera. And this was, again, as I talked about when I explained the concept of a hot mic, a private conversation. Now, really, the crux of this issue for me is, does it really make logical sense for a person who is the host of an entertainment show like Billy Bush is with Access Hollywood here to take this big time guest to task in private for a problematic comment at the risk of driving them away from the network or angering this person who has influence in the entertainment industry and costing him his job and his future career prospects? Can you really expect the average person, because, look at Billy Bush, he's pretty average, he's not like, Mensa member over here, but can you really expect the average person to take this personal risk to themselves to take a person to task in private? It's not like he's on air. It's not like he has a platform here. It's not like he's in public and can make a statement and can say, Donald, all these people are watching and these people need to know that it's wrong. It was a hot mic situation. They didn't know that the tape was rolling. Basically, why are you going to risk that to yourself to, take this person to task over a comment that nobody else, at least to your knowledge at that point, would ever hear? I don't think that's pretty unreasonable here. Now, Billy Bush, if he had chosen to do that, I certainly don't think that anybody in that situation would have been wrong to challenge Donald Trump and, basically go die on that hill, which means, die on that hill, if you don't have that expression in your language, basically means to, pick your battle and, fight it to the end, and no matter what cost to you. So, nobody would have been wrong to go out there and do that and pick this fight and have it and challenge Donald Trump. Certainly nobody would be in the wrong to challenge him here. But can you really expect a person to do something that could be so detrimental to their ability to feed themselves and be employed simply on principle over private words? I don't think that that's a reasonable expectation at the end of the day. Now, obviously, as Nayyera Haq said, Billy Bush is certainly not a courageous person here. He's definitely lacking that social courage. But my argument is basically that Billy Bush has no more or less social courage in this moment than any average human being would be. I think, of course, Nayyera Haq from the Bill Maher show and the Obama administration would be more than willing to take someone to task if someone in her presence said this, like Donald Trump or whatever. Not that Donald Trump would ever be in her presence without making some sort of lewd comment additionally. But, I'm sure that she would be up to the task. But I think that, she is, again, there's nothing wrong with this, but I think that she's just, and people like her are just more prepared to do that. And maybe they have the privilege of, not having your finances depend on your relationship with this person directly or indirectly. So I don't think that anybody in that position whose employment status depended on the person they were talking to in a private conversation, I don't think that having that lack of social courage there is a bad thing. I don't think it makes you a bad person. I don't even think it necessarily makes you a coward. I think you can be not courageous, but also not cowardly. I think you could just be at the middle of the scale. And I don't think, and this is one of the things where I sort of split with progressives, I don't think you can be, I do think you can be in the middle of something and abstain and not be a bad person and not be taking a side of the oppressor. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And honestly, you can say that, Billy Bush could sue for wrongful termination if Donald Trump got him fired simply for challenging him in this comment. But do you really want to hire a lawyer for challenging somebody's comments that are problematic in private? And can you ever really hide behind legislation enough that, to ensure that nobody gets fired from a network for losing clients, even if they're losing clients for a righteous reason? I mean, maybe Billy Bush would have gotten away for, losing Donald Trump as a client. But what happens when Billy Bush goes to interview the next problematic male star, and he says something and Billy Bush stands up to him in this hypothetical situation, and he loses that client for Access Hollywood as well, and they go to whatever, Entertainment Tonight or E! News or TMZ or whatever. What happens when he keeps losing clients because he is choosing to basically be a martyr for these causes because he has to on principle? Can he really hide behind legislation? Is there enough legislation to hide behind that will prevent him from losing his job at a network where he's consistently losing clients because he refuses to be in a room with a person who isn't 100% puritanical? I don't think that you can hide behind wrongful termination after a certain point here. So I think Billy Bush knows that instinctively, and I think that he is more than happy just to play along because, to his knowledge, again, nobody else in the world is ever going to hear it. I think a more reasonable expectation would be to say that Billy Bush needed to push the issue if, again, he had some kind of platform. If he was interviewing Donald Trump formally and Donald Trump said this, and, he could say, Donald, all these people are watching out here, and people need to know that what you said is kind of piggish and wrong and degrading. I think that, if this had been a public thing, again, if this had not just been somebody leaving the mics on and then Billy Bush and Donald Trump not thinking this would ever get out to anybody else, I think that, Billy Bush would certainly have an obligation here to stand up and, say that, this needs to be checked and balanced before it goes out onto the airwaves into society. But and yes, of course, again, it does need to be checked and balanced in private conversations as well, but can you really expect a person to do that at a cost to themselves that could be so potentially high? I think that's a bit of an unfair expectation again. And I'm pretty quick to criticize people who use the "I'm just doing my job" excuse. It's certainly not an excuse for everything. The Nazis on some level were just doing their job. So, just being ordered to do it by somebody else and just because you're receiving money for employment for doing it, that doesn't necessarily make something right. But in this case, it does make sense because, again, just pissing off a big star who, and this is an important bit as well, do you think Donald Trump would change his mind? I honestly don't think that there was any chance of Billy Bush standing up to Donald Trump, hypothetically, and having Donald Trump, big and powerful and secure in his masculinity and his toxic masculinity as he is, actually change his mind. So just pissing off this big star, this meal ticket, who most certainly will not change his mind and will probably demand your firing if you stand up to him and make him unhappy, does doing that make sense in any type of utilitarian calculus? I don't really think so. I don't think that what you stand to lose is anywhere in the realm of what you stand to gain. I read an article about this real-time interview again, which has sort of sparked the issue up again on this website that's focused on women called Refinery 29, that says, when you stand up, basically, or when you do stand up, it leads to a big change for those who don't look like you. And they're again talking about the same concept that Nayyirah Haq was talking about, of being in the same room with people who look like you and are saying problematic things. Basically, they make the argument that when you stand up to those people, it can lead to a big change for people who are not in that room who don't look like you. But again, this is sort of a flawed premise here, because Donald Trump is not going to change his mind when this little sycophantic Billy Bush challenges him in this hypothetical situation. He's not going to be like, oh yeah, Billy Bush, wow, he spoke the truth to me today. I think I'm going to have to, have a dark night of the soul and change my opinions about, grabbing people by the pussy. No. That is an unrealistic expectation of most powerful white men, and certainly, especially with what we know now about him, it is certainly an unreasonable expectation to have in retrospect about Donald Trump and then to apply an expectation because of that to Billy Bush. This is not a battle for the fate of women here that happened in this bus. It was not like Billy Bush had an opportunity to change an extremely powerful man's mind. He would have just simply, Donald Trump, again, we see it all the time, and especially to say this now in 2018 is absurd, because we know that Donald Trump does not change his mind when he's confronted with facts, when he's confronted with modern social policy. Donald Trump retaliates against people, and it is absolutely 100% justifiable to say that Billy Bush would not have changed his mind and would almost certainly have been fired or received punitive measures or a demotion at Access Hollywood for this. And again, he would have been right to do so if he had chosen to, but is that really the hill he wants to die on? Can we really expect him to shoot himself in the foot when really nothing is at stake here, when really his ability to make a positive impact on a mind so thick and stupid as Donald Trump is in question here, I don't think you can expect that of him, and I think it's just unfair, and I think that is, again, the idea of social courage being taken to the extreme. Like, it's great to have social courage, but not having it does not make you, like, a terrible person. And, you know, Billy Bush has this narrative that he's pimping now that he wanted to move the conversation along, and that is sort of questionable considering how he behaved later and encouraging that woman to, I shouldn't say that woman, that's a Bill Clinton thing, encouraging Ariane Zucker to hug Donald Trump and then himself after saying all those sort of repulsive things that she wasn't aware of. You know, I don't know that he was necessarily super, interested in moving the conversation along, but laughing along and being sort of an enabler here is by no means a full endorsement. It certainly isn't an endorsement of what Donald Trump said about, you know, kissing women without consent and grabbing them by the pussy. It is simply just trying to grease the wheels, and to some degree, whether or not you agree with it, or whether or not he genuinely found those comments funny, he basically is doing, on some level, an act of placation. He is basically saying, you know, I'm going to just be what this guy wants. It's a private conversation. It's not hurting anybody because nobody's going to hear it. At least that was his idea in the moment. At least he would have no reason to believe otherwise. And basically, to me, if you watch the video, you might have a different opinion, but if you watch the video, to me, it just seems like he is, you know, laughing along and placating him. I don't know if he was really in the hope that the conversation topic would change at that point. Certainly not when they were talking about Nancy O'Dell and, like, buying her furniture and Donald Trump moving on her like a bitch. I believe it's maybe a little bit more believable when he starts talking about grabbing people by the pussy. So either way, though, Billy Bush is trying to basically just grease the wheels here, and he's not feeding it in the same way that he would be if he really responded back and he's not at Donald Trump's level here, is what I'm saying here. And the idea that Billy Bush was or is perpetuating a culture by laughing along in a private conversation just to keep things moving or placate the person he's talking to, with a man who, again, is more likely than not susceptible to change. You know, you can't really say that Billy Bush is actively participating in this culture more than he is just sort of letting it slide. And I think there needs to be a distinction. Now, in the end, Billy Bush is someone who knows how to work a client. He knows how to work an interview. And honestly, if you do watch later into the tape where Billy Bush is walking behind Donald Trump in this studio and, like, glad handing and talking to people in the studio, I think they're walking through, like, Jay Leno's studio at the time or whatever. When you see him, he actually reminds me of, if you guys remember old OJ videos that I made with this guy named Babbling Brahma, obviously not his real name, but his alias. But if you remember videos I made with him, you wouldn't really necessarily know it by watching those videos. But Billy Bush in this video sort of reminds me of him, because in the end, I wound up finding out that Babbling Brahma was a very sort of sleazy and two-faced person who, you know, took great pride in his ability to, you know, get along and essentially manipulate people to slide by and be on good terms with everybody, and, you know, thus get what he wants. So Billy Bush seems to me like this kind of person, which is not a very good person, I would say, but I don't think that his laughter or his, you can try to call it complicity, but I don't think his laughter is really indicative of true belief. I think it is simply the hallmark of somebody who is very skillful at social engineering and manipulation, and basically just getting along with everybody in society that they need to get along with to keep their meal ticket, basically, and keep themselves in a position of employment and power. So I do think Billy Bush is kind of sleazy, but I don't think that he is, like, you know, big participant in toxic masculinity. I think that it's just a business opportunity for him that he is, you know, allowing to, you know, walk by him. And again, can you really expect Billy Bush or anybody to throw themselves on their sword at the cost of not only their own paycheck, but probably the paychecks of all the people working on that episode? It doesn't seem, again, to, you know, pass any kind of utilitarian calculus. It seems like, again, I'm using money here a lot, which is not something I like to do that often. But really, the case here is, and this is something you have to realize, the case here is simply Billy Bush's paycheck and livelihood and well-being versus potentially angering Donald Trump by challenging it. It is not the case of Billy Bush's paycheck and livelihood and employment versus the ultimate fate of all women everywhere. That is not what's at stake here, as I was sort of saying earlier. What's at stake here is not the fate of women. It is not the culture of toxic masculinity that Billy Bush could have struck down in that moment for all time. It is simply one private instance of something that he let slide in order to avoid angering a person who can take away his livelihood, and I don't think you can blame a person for that. My laptop died, so it has magically disappeared. But to get back to the topic, whether or not Billy Bush was genuinely entertained by what Trump was saying, he basically essentially just generally kept things rolling in the only way he knew how, and I don't think that makes him a monster. I do think that one of the things we're sort of losing sight of with some areas of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up and whatever hashtag is popular these days, I don't want to be dismissive. I do think it's important, but I think that, I just think hashtags and slogans and shit are stupid, but it is an important thing that's happening here. But I do think that sometimes these movements lose sight of the fact that there are strata here. There are different levels here. Billy Bush is not Aziz Ansari. Aziz Ansari is not Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, at least as far as we know, is not at the level of a Harvey Weinstein, though. We might just, we might get there eventually, depending on how many confirmed reports we get sometime in the future. Although, yeah, there are women who have accused him. So maybe Donald Trump is Harvey Weinstein. I should probably walk that back. But anyway, in the end, Billy Bush is simply moving things along in the way he knows how. And again, I don't think that not having social courage means he is actively contributing to the culture of toxic masculinity or really being a bad person at all in general. And there is a little bit of an element of what I call blurred lines frenzy to this, because Trump is most certainly a creep, but he is an insecure creep. And it seems to me that when he's making these sort of disgusting comments about women, he's really maybe just talking up his own game. When he's describing what it essentially sounds like borderline sexual assault. And there is more ambiguity here, however, than some people want to believe, though. And what I mean when I say blurred lines frenzy is, there was this thing that happened basically when people, first heard the song Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke and Pharrell. People started labeling the song as rapey and saying that the blurred lines in the song are the blurred lines of consent, and that rapists say, "I know you want it," which is a prominent lyric in the song's hook or chorus. And this was, I call it a frenzy because basically saying or reading it in this way ignores the rest of the lyrics of the song, which do imply that there is some kind of reciprocation from the subject of the song to the singer, which is certainly not a rapey thing. It's not explicit verbal consent, but it's certainly describing a reciprocative relationship in this song. And the title actually refers to the blurred lines of whether or not the subject of the song should be unfaithful or leave a controlling or boring partner for the singer. So it's vapid, most certainly, and kind of terrible, but it's not rape or rapey. But back to Donald Trump and Billy Bush. On the scale from what Donald Trump is, fond of saying as a dismissive excuse for what he said, on the scale from locker room talk to actually being a sexual predator, there is a range here that I feel like some people are not willing to acknowledge. When they're talking about Ariane Zucker and Nancy O'Dell, Billy Bush's co-host, and he's talking about like buying her furniture and moving on her like a bitch again. It really is just your run-of-the-mill objectification of women. It really isn't anything more than that. It's certainly not sexual assault here, but there is the matter of grabbing and kissing women without eating, which is a little bit different here. I'm going to try to avoid the Terry Gilliam pitfall here. Terry Gilliam is one of the creators of Monty Python, who was recently in hot water for criticizing the Me Too movement because he said that people, or the women who were abused by Harvey Weinstein, were simply part of a transaction with him for career gains. And it doesn't sound like that's true. Basically, based on what we've heard about Harvey Weinstein, it certainly sounds like he was abusing power and saying that, no, if you don't do this to me, then it's going to affect your career negatively. It's not like it's a transaction here. And it certainly doesn't sound like Donald Trump is talking about two consenting adults transacting either for career gains on here when he talks about, kissing models and kissing beautiful women without even waiting and grabbing them by the pussy. So there was definitely, stuff that's higher up on this scale as well. I'm confident. I'm confident that there have been women who have enticed Trump looking for, something in return for their careers. But from what we now know about him and, walking backstage into dressing rooms during his pageants, I'm sure that Trump has most certainly made unwanted advances and abused his power as well. Someone who talks like this in or out of the metaphorical locker room should not become president, should not have become president. And either they are or they want to be a predator. I don't know, and like I said, there is an ambiguity here. I don't know that this comment, is Donald Trump recounting specific sexual assault or sexual assaults, but he certainly idolizes that kind of power or wants to have that kind of power. It does seem a little bit vague as to whether or not he's actually done this. Donald Trump very well could be exaggerating his power and his influence and what women let him do to impress a sycophantic Billy Bush who's sitting across from him or next to him or wherever on this tour bus. So I don't necessarily think it's an admission of anything. I do think there is ambiguity here, but it definitely, he definitely seems to desire the power to commit what is basically sexual assault. But I can also understand how, to Billy Bush in that moment, it might have just seemed like kind of a big blustering brag, and Trump is most certainly known for that. I don't think that, going full sexual predator here is any more valid than saying, oh, it's just locker room talk. It's just two normal dudes. This is not normal behavior, but it is not, again, an admission to sexual assault, I believe, because, again, Donald Trump is not really the master of language. As you might have picked up on if you've seen him in news coverage. So I do think that, it is reasonable that, to bring it back to Billy Bush, he might have seen this as some sort of blustering brag. And honestly, Billy Bush does seem less enthused about the pussy grabbing comment and the, kissing women without waiting comments than he does when they're talking about Nancy O'Dell buying furniture and her fake tits and whatnot. And honestly, the Nancy O'Dell thing is sort of an incoherent story. Honestly, he talks about trying to buy her furniture, and he says, I'll take you where they have some nice furniture. And I guess that's a setup for a punchline, or a setup for a change of venue that would be funny, but he just completely fails to deliver on, he's just sort of incoherent. He doesn't know how to deliver a joke. And honestly, the way he describes himself, moving on her like a bitch, I don't know if he's the bitch or if she's the bitch and he's like the male dog, but it honestly doesn't make him seem that great. I don't know that humping a woman furiously makes him seem anything but desperate. So I don't know that Donald Trump is even particularly good at bragging about himself, but I guess that's kind of just a matter of personal opinion. I definitely do think it goes to him being very imprecise with language, though. But in the end, I don't know if Billy Bush should have been fired, like I said towards the start of the video. It does feel sort of cheap to punish somebody for something that happened so long ago when there are actual crimes with statutes of limitations shorter than this. Billy Bush, again, in the modern day, does seem genuinely willing to become more knowledgeable about this culture that he sort of let go by him, even if he doesn't know really how to talk about it yet. When he was on Bill Maher, he did the thing where he goes, oh, I have X amount of daughters, so I understand this better now thing, which, I guess it's helpful if, having daughters ultimately is the thing that makes you understand women, but it's kind of also, or respecting women, not necessarily understanding women in a complete sense, but I guess that's one way to get there. But honestly, it's kind of worrisome, and I agree with progressives on this, that, if you have to say that, oh, a woman deserves respect because she's a mother or a daughter or a sister or, a wife or whatever, if you have to respect women in relationship to somebody, I do agree that it's kind of a stupid thing to say, and how people phrase that and use it as their oh, I have a black friend type excuse. So, I do think that's kind of weird that you need to actually create a human woman with your penis before you learn how to respect them and understand what they might go through, even though they can probably tell you. You could have asked any woman and she probably would have told you to some degree what goes on and what women need and what women want to feel respected. But anyway, I think Billy Bush is, for that flaw, even despite that flaw, he is willing to learn. And I do think that one of the less desirable outcomes of the Me Too culture as well is that blood is demanded instantly. Everybody wants their pound of flesh. They want Billy Bush to be fired instantly. I think in this rush to justice that you see we lose the opportunity to talk to somebody, especially somebody who hasn't been accused of actually physically doing anything, simply enabling someone who perhaps has, like Donald Trump and Billy Bush enabling him. I think that when you demand the firing or the punishment immediately of someone who is simply enabling somebody, I think you lose the opportunity to take that person and have an honest conversation with them and see if they're remorseful and willing to understand and learn more and maybe not lose their livelihood. So I do think that the firing of Billy Bush for enabling Donald Trump on that bus was a bit ridiculous, but there of course is the counterpoint where he basically physically encouraged this woman, Ariane Zucker, to hug Donald Trump. So that is kind of a scummy thing. But again, it is so long ago that I feel like there are actual statutes of limitations on crimes that are shorter than this. So I don't know. I think it's kind of ambiguous as to whether or not he really should have lost his job 11 years later. I do think that we should simply judge Billy Bush and all people in situations like his on whether or not they truly agree with opinions like Donald Trump's, not what they let slide to get along. I fully disagree that the standard that you walk past is the standard you accept, which is what one of Bill Maher's other guests said to Billy Bush on that show, which I think aired Friday the 16th, if you want to go watch those clips. That's a far too black and white reading of life. It doesn't account for the gray areas, and we all know, I think, that if you are an existentialist, that life is pretty much gray areas, almost exclusively. I don't want to say exclusively. I don't want to make a blanket statement about anything, but I think that most things need a bit of a gray area to be realistically applied. You might walk past things, so to speak, that you don't accept in your heart because there are other mitigating factors. People might not stand up against an oppressor because they don't want their families hurt and retaliated against for them. You can't say that a person who refuses to retaliate against an oppressor because they're concerned for themselves or especially their families is equally as bad as the oppressor or is part of the same culture as the oppressor. No, that's not true. But it is true that if too many people do walk past things that they don't accept in their heart, it can snowball into a sort of "and then they came for me" type situation, which refers to the Nazis and how they came for the Jews and they came for the Gypsies and then they came for X, Y, and Z, and nobody stood up, so there was nobody left at the end when they came for the scapegoats and just regular average run-of-the-mill people who hadn't even done something according to the Nazis. They just imprison whoever they want, political prisoners. So it can lead to that type of situation in principle, but again, it's important to realize that the stakes are not that high here. Plain and simple. Again, it's not Billy Bush and his failed chance to cut the head off all misogyny forever. It's not what's at stake here. It's Billy Bush and his chance to have a paycheck or not. And Donald Trump will be the same regardless of whether or not he said on that bus. He could have said anything on that bus, and Donald Trump would be probably the same person that he is today. And I think that even in 2005, you can get that sense off of him, and that's not unreasonable. The expectation of people, in closing here, to always be 100% righteous and vigilant, no matter what area of life it's in or what it costs them personally, no matter how small the stakes are, no matter how much or how little of a reward you can potentially reap. The expectation to be 100% vigilant and courageous is completely unreasonable. It makes everybody potential martyrs in the fight for some sterile and unattainable world justice. And forced martyrs are not allowed their own personal dignity. It's okay not to be courageous if nothing is on the line. Silence is not complicity unless you're God and you sit silently as your world suffers. But real mortal people have real mortal people concerns that can mitigate them and make them more willing to be silent. Doesn't mean that in their hearts they're bad or that they're choosing the side of the oppressor in truth. It just means that they're letting something slide because they need to consider themselves or things they care about. And you could say, oh, that's selfish. But really, again, what are the stakes in this specific situation? Again, it's not the fate of all women in the world on the line in that bus. As far as Billy Bush knew, it was literally nothing because no one was ever going to hear that. And hopefully it could just go into the ether and never be spoken of again. To expect the world to be puritanical in private conversation is utterly foolish, because of how the human brain is structured. People will always have, public and private opinions and public and private faces that they show to people depending on the context that they're in. That's never going to go away. People aren't going to stop being more gross, more disgusting, more free with their id than they are in public when they're in private. They're not going to stop that, and that's kind of an unreasonable expectation as well. And I think that by now I've basically shown how this idea of 100% uptime on social courage is built on pillars of complete and total unreasonable expectation. The long and short of it is basically Billy Bush is absolutely an enabler. He's not courageous. He's no hero. But did he react how most everybody would have reacted in that situation, sitting across from a powerful person with the power to affect or even end your career? I think he did. So it makes no sense to me why we're focusing on Billy Bush again and not focusing on the people who are actually committing assault, like maybe the president. You can try to lay rape culture and toxic masculinity at Billy Bush's feet, but why not lay it at Trump's? Why not lay it at Harvey Weinstein's? Why loop in all these people who are basically going through an understandable human struggle and are not actively preying on anybody? Why not any actual offender here? And that's the question I ask of the social courage crowd, and I hope that it makes anybody out there who's watching who agrees with the social courage idea to sort of temper their opinions. Not lose them entirely, but just temper them and account for ambiguity and account for the gray areas of life and understand that it costs a lot of some people to be 100% courageous and challenge these powerful people all the time. And maybe Billy Bush is more equipped financially to challenge somebody and lose his job and get back up. But to have this maxim that you must always be courageous and lose friends over it and lose your social support group over it and, lose X, Y, and Z over it, challenge your boss. Like, not everybody is going to be able to land on their feet from that if they get fired from their job for, challenging an authority figure who is powerful and problematic. Not everybody can recover from this. It's not a universal maxim by any means, and I don't think you can really expect Billy Bush or anybody to challenge and lose and fight and be at a disadvantage for no potential gain whatsoever, and no overarching social change could result from it either. So I just think it's an unreasonable expectation. I'm obviously Jesus. I got to go edit this video. I have fucked up so many times, and I will see you next week. The suggestion box is empty, so please do leave something down there. I'll probably be doing a Cooking with Christ in the first or second week of April, so look forward to that. If you have any vegan recipes or recipes that can be easily veganized you want to see me make, I would be totally down for that in the suggestions as well. Put them anywhere. I will see them. See you next week. And one thing I wanted to clarify here before we end the video is what I was talking about earlier, which is what I said that Donald Trump tries to deliver a joke, because it really is remarkable. You can watch it on the video, but I'll read it out for those of you who are kind of lazy. So he goes, "I moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. She wanted to get some furniture. I said, I'll show you where they have some nice furniture." And then he begins to repeat himself by saying, "I took her out furniture," before cutting himself off and saying, "I moved on her like a bitch." What's amazing and hysterical to me about this is that he makes like a punchline, like he's going to do a punchline where he says, "I'll show you where they have some nice furniture," and he's going to take her back to his bedroom or something where they have nice furniture, I guess. But then he literally, the next part of the story is he takes her out furniture shopping, which is hysterical to me. But yeah. Point of this video is basically Donald Trump is a goddamn predator and a moron, probably. But I don't think we should be making laughter into complicity in some kind of cultural crime. See you next week.